Welcome, everybody. This is Imran Nanlawala, and we are a continuous charity, and we got a great webinar in store for you today: storytelling and building your personal brand for college applications with Hamada Zahawi, CEO and founder of Right Track Admissions. Hamada is a graduate of UCLA, University of Cambridge, UC Berkeley, and Harvard University. Right Track focuses on helping you craft your story through each stage, guided by their core pillars: guiding, story crafting, editing, and timekeeping. Brother Hamada, how you doing? Can you hear me now, Hamada?
I can hear you perfectly.
How's everything, brother?
Alhamdulillah.
So we're really excited to have you today, and especially with the university semester. It's gonna start probably at the end of August, beginning of September in different places. So one step that most people have difficulties in is applying for universities, writing that personal statement. So just very quick before we go into the webinar, can you give us a high-level overview on why you started this organization?
Sure. So as an applicant, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I think that's even more important than my story, but thank you very much for having me and giving me the opportunity. I think if there's one motivation I'd love to do is to help people really tell their story and be able to take that story to the next level, because the story you tell is also going to basically pave the path for the career you have and so on and so forth. It motivates you. It's your narrative. It's your brand and what takes you forward. So what really motivated me to kind of create this organization, and what I did was I studied abroad. I studied in Egypt as I guess in middle school and high school in a British school in Egypt. And so I really wasn't really accustomed to the storytelling process as maybe American students are, especially in high school and going into college. So when I applied, it was very difficult for me to get into a top tier school. So I really have to work very, very hard on my application. My SAT scores were dismal. And even though I had done well in the International Baccalaureate exam, effectively I didn't have a strong application to get into a top program. So I really worked hard on my essays, and it got me into UC Santa Barbara. I was able to then transfer to UCLA. And then thereafter, I really started understanding the necessity of storytelling and story crafting, the narrative you have, the personal brand that you carry with you. And that concept and that learning helped me get into UC Berkeley for law school. Later got me into Cambridge with a half scholarship. And then afterwards, I also applied the same learning lessons to get into Harvard at the Kennedy School with a full scholarship. So the point is, the story you tell and so forth is not just important in the academic setting, but it's also important in the professional setting and even in the personal setting. It's a lot about storytelling, and I don't mean storytelling as in BSing and just coming up with ideas just to get past. It's being able to craft a narrative that is personal to you and marketing yourself to convince other people about who you are and what you plan to do, and getting them on board on your journey. And so I started Right Track in 2008 based on the difficulty for me to get into, again, college, to get into law school, especially for law school, because again, my LSATs were very poor as well. And based on those experiences, I felt that there's a lot more to be done to help people who are disadvantaged in terms of their inability to tell the story, or disadvantaged because of their academic record or profile, to really be able to find their story, surface it, and take it to the next level. And that's really the genesis of Right Track.
I really appreciate that introduction, man. It's very thorough and gives us insight into your own history and how you now are serving those who are in the same position you were many, many years ago. I definitely have some more questions. I'm going to hold off on those questions until the end when we have time for Q&A. And to our audience, definitely after the webinar, Brother Hamada is going to be taking questions based on the presentation. So feel free to comment on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're tuning in, and we'll try to get to all the questions that we can. So Hamada, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we can start with the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you again for having me, Ron, and for asking the questions. I look forward to getting some more questions from you towards the end of the presentation. So to do this, I could pretty much do this presentation almost ad lib. I love it. It's something I'm really passionate about, but I thought it was even more important to kind of put it into a structured format. So I hope it doesn't bore people. I will still be here with you. You can see me on the left side of the screen. To see my excitement when I do this kind of work. But This topic has been very, very close to my heart because it doesn't just talk about admissions for college or admissions for graduate school, but it really talks about how to build your brand for the rest of your life, effectively, and especially as it pertains even to the professional environment. I know a lot of you are connected to ACC simply also because of necessity of financial aid and so forth, and the ability to raise funds and be able to take out loans and so on and so forth from that perspective. And even there, effective story crafting, storytelling helps persuade those people to be able to part with their money to help you along your journey. So don't think this is just about, from that kind of perspective. So in any event, what I wanted to kind of jump straight into the presentation, and let me know if you are having issues hearing me, let me know. I can see if I can try to find a workaround, but hopefully we'll be able to get past any technical difficulties and get straight into the substance of the presentation. So let me start by giving you guys a brief background. I think Brother Imran did a fantastic job talking about my own background, academics. Again, I went to UCLA, I transferred there from Santa Barbara. I graduated, alhamdulillah, summa cum laude, in a history and political science role. I then went on to go to law school. That was a very difficult process for me to apply to law school again because my standardized scores were so poor, but I was able to get into UC Berkeley law. There I had an incredible journey, to be honest, even though law school sucks in many ways. It's very difficult, tedious, but I had an incredible journey. I was able to work with some colleagues to start the Berkeley Journal of Middle Eastern and Islamic Law at Berkeley, which modeled on UCLA's law's own journal, I was the editor-in-chief of the first issue that we published. I was in the law review. I did a bunch of things from the legal perspective. I also then went on to pass the California bar and practice as an attorney for a short time before then moving on to the U.S. government. And I'll talk a little bit about my own professional path. I also took some time out of school, out of law school, and went on to do a master's in Cambridge. I did an MPhil in international relations, which was a fascinating degree. I did that for a year, came back, finished up law school, worked in private law, and then started Right Track. Thereafter, the journey of life, as things have a way of kind of panning out, I ended up working with the U.S. government doing international development law, something I had actually written about in the story that I told for law school, which was truly fascinating. That doesn't really happen that often, right? That you are able to talk about something and then 9-10 years later, you end up doing exactly what you're talking about or wanted to do. So I ended up doing international development law, working with the U.S. government, Department of Commerce under the Obama administration, which I was very proud of doing. I focused on Iraq, my country of origin, and I also worked throughout the Middle East, South Asia, Eastern Europe, and some other parts of the world, helping from an international development perspective. I then resigned from government and went back to school, because I love school, as you can tell, and did my master's at Harvard, where I received a full scholarship while I was there, and then did a bunch of activities and so forth on campus, which also forms part of my brand and who I am. In terms of just kind of taking a big step back, even the challenges that I faced along the way academically, I didn't have great SAT scores, didn't have good GRE scores, didn't have good LSAT scores. So always I was trying to overcome a poor standardized score with a stronger application, with a stronger essay, with a stronger story. Okay, so that's become part of my own journey, right? The concept of international development, public speaking, helping students, academic advocacy, and so on and so forth, civic engagement. These are all very much part and parcel of my own story, of my own personal brand. I want you guys to keep that in mind because that's what I developed and that's how I've kind of crafted the activities and what I do to substantiate and to raise to the surface the brand that I have, the goals that I have, the values that I carry forward. And one may say, well, what's the difference between your values and your brand, your narrative and your story? And all of these things, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg. One feeds into the other, and they're constantly malleable, right? Things are constantly moving. As you grow, as you evolve, your story evolves, right? Your narrative evolves, right? But there are some core values that just stay steadfast. And we'll talk about that through this process. Okay, so why does this even matter? Well, if you go back to, your brand, think about that 68% of admissions officers think it's fair game to see your social media account. So anything you post on your social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, all of it's fair game. And so they'll start to see that. And if you start to look at patterns, you'll start to see what you like, what you dislike, and what you stand for simply by the social media you have. So it's imperative that you're already thinking about your personal brand and what you are able to dispense and to send out to the universe in terms of what you're standing for and what you're trying to put on your social media accounts. That also plays a role also with employers. Employers, up to 70% of them say, again, it's fair game to check out the social media accounts of our employees. I know I'm in a position now where we do hire folks for my companies and so forth, and I can tell you that is something that we look for, because you don't want to be in a position of being blindsided by somebody that has all kinds of issues, bigotry, intolerance, racism, and other things that could definitely come back and impact your own PR for your company and the kind of people that you want to hire, right? So the social media in itself is a driver of the perceptions of who you are. And so you want to be cognizant of that. And since all of us pretty much are connected and online, we need to make sure that the personal brand aligns with what we're putting out there. So when you're thinking about it, in the end of the day, especially from the academic perspective, your grades, your SAT scores, especially, for example, some schools are basically waiving or creating optionality for SATs and ACTs. Even graduate schools are taking less notice for the standardized testing portion of a complete application. Your story matters more and more and more. So how do we start building your story brand? Well, I guess it's easy to say the first one, to get you to know yourself, right? Who are you? What do you stand for? Now, some of you may be in your 20s, maybe in your 30s, right? And thinking to yourself, well, I've already kind of formulated who I am. I don't need to keep thinking about that. But you do, because you're constantly evolving, right? You're constantly evolving. So you want to ask yourself, how are you unique? If you had a superpower, what would it be? If you had core values, things that are triggers to you, those are good ideas. What triggers you? That probably leads into who you are and what you value. What really makes you happy? What I mean by happiness, I mean the physical manifestation of happiness. Endorphins bursting, dopamine firing at all 6 cylinders, right? What makes you happy? That probably plays a role in terms of certain values and certain things that make you who you are, right? And what legacy do you want to leave behind? That's an important factor too. I'm constantly asking myself, am I doing enough for the legacy I want to leave behind? Am I making a big enough impact, right? And I think that's an important imperative in terms of the personal brand you have, right? And in developing your brand, once you kind of start thinking about who you are, what makes you unique, what are the superpowers, what makes you who you are and makes you stand out, especially if you see in the top over there, I kind of have written up there what Jeff Bezos said is, your brand is what people are saying about you when you're not in the room, right? So what do you stand for? What is that identity that people think about when they tie you to that, right? And so you want to start developing your brand. You want to start thinking about the interactions that you're having, the interests that you're formulating and garnering, right? The introspective aspect of who you are, thinking about who you are as a person, right? Rather than just what other people are saying only. But being introspective, being okay to be in a room alone and just thinking about yourself, thinking about who you are, what you want to be. That's an important factor. It's okay to be lost in your head. It's okay to be lost in your own space. I often ask people, when you're traveling, is it possible for you to travel on your own and have a good time? Is it possible for you to be lost in your thoughts, read a book for hours on end and not constantly be on social media? Like I went on a social media fast. I think actually since Ramadan, I've been on off of Instagram, right? Because I just don't want to get on it. I don't want to get distracted by it. This is a crazy important time, I think, during COVID to really be introspective about what you want to achieve. Hence why I'm on this webinar, because it's more important to me to do these kind of things to really get out the word and help others than to simply just be on social media and, looking at what other people are doing, right? And then the idea is once you start developing those core values after thinking really hard about it and really fomenting who you are in terms of personal brand, you want to stay consistent, right? To what remains, to the things that are core to you, but also being ready to balance that with your own evolution. Like I am not the person I was when I was 20. I've evolved in certain ways, for good, maybe for bad, but I've constantly been evolving. So you have core values, that's your foundation. And as you build on top of it, those things may evolve, but they stay on that same core foundation, which I think is very important to think about. Now, continuing with that whole concept about, and it says like your personal brand is a never-ending journey of self-discovery, which is exactly what it is. It's a constant evolution. You need to be ready for that. Is I kind of say, let's maintain the three ways of balancing those different identities, right? So think about it in buckets. It's what you develop in yourself and that balance between what you do personally, what you do professionally, what you do from a passion. What does that sound like? So maybe for me, personal is I love fitness, right? So I want to constantly be fit, active, and so forth. Just an example. Maybe for personal, I want to be connected to my family. What am I giving back to them? Professional. What am I doing and learning each day that adds value to a larger, greater community that may not necessarily be directed to me, but in general, what am I doing to different communities and growing and really being proud of what I'm achieving? So what kind of jobs and what kind of things am I doing? Maintaining that balance with what is your passion? Things that may be completely out of the box. For me, I love traveling. I've been to over 100 countries because to me, it's so important to travel, to learn, and put myself in these very bizarre situations that are out of the ordinary, things I'm not familiar with, outside of my comfort zone, right? That to me is an important way of my own personal development. So I always try to maintain that balance between what am I giving back to the people I love, to myself included, right? What am I doing to kind of grow personally? What am I doing to kind of grow and develop and evolve professionally? And what am I doing to really harbor and kind of really still work on those things that I'm very passionate about, right? And then balancing that also helps with your own branding and identity. When people think about me, they definitely do think about my passions because that's what I put a lot out on social media. When people think about me that I've worked with, they think about the kind of things that I've done in terms of my own core values as a professional, right? A couple other things I want you to kind of think about as well is building your tribe, that network. It's so imperative that, I mean, even let's just use this example of being on this webinar. The reason I'm on it wasn't because I found ACC, is because somebody at ACC knows me, knows the kind of work that I've done, and contacted me and said, we'd love to have you, right? And that only would have happened, or that would never have happened, excuse me, if I hadn't been out there really putting my brand in people's radar, right? If I hadn't been social, if I hadn't networked and built communities across the country, right? So all of these things are very, very important. So building your tribe, the network, being involved in campus events and events, conferences, all that kind of stuff is super important. Building those alliances, those mentorships across different groups of people so that you have, people that are going to be supporting you, allies and so forth through your life, right? These are all important factors to kind of really honing that identity and solidifying it, crystallizing it, okay? And then finding your platform. Again, go back to your social media. You have an opportunity. Maybe you haven't blown up yet. You haven't been a big deal. So in that case, make sure that you can jump on your social media, clean it up, and make sure that you're putting things out there that really reflect who you are. You may have put some stuff up there when you were like 15, 16, 17, you kept it up there. Clean it out. It doesn't really reflect who you are. Some people may say that's disingenuous because that was who you were at one point in your life. I get it. But you will be judged in the court of social justice, so to speak, out there where people are policing each other. You will be judged for things that you put out there that may no longer be practical, may no longer be relevant, and truthfully may be inflammatory, where back then it wasn't and now it is. And so if that's something that you've moved on from that belief, take it off, because it's not worth going down that path when it's not reflective of the brand of who you are today. And take the opportunities to kind of go out there and strengthen your own identity. Like for me, public speaking is mission critical. Some of it I do intuitively, some of it I've practiced, but it's super important to build your communication skills through video, through writing, through different mechanisms. These are all ways of taking that brand that you solidified and built and then surfaced it and shown it to the world. So how do you create, now that we've talked about the aspects of who you are and aspects of what your personal brand is, how do you put that into a story? That comes back to the storytelling aspect of yourself. Again, going back from an academic perspective, put it this way. IQ has always been something that people have been held on in terms of the standard of excellence. If you have a high IQ, you're somebody that the company wants, right? Maybe in a certain world, in certain scientific or engineering roles, that may be the case, where IQ is coveted over EQ. But a true adaptable company, okay, is able and would want and would prefer to have students that have EQ or employees that have high EQ that can work well with people across the globe, work well with people across the the interprofessional hierarchy, people that have the emotional skills to be able to convince, to bring people on board to lead. So EQ is critical, which is why it's so important that when you're thinking about your story, you're not just thinking about it from a purely technical IQ perspective, but from an EQ perspective, from an emotional intelligence perspective. So I recently filmed a video for the YouTube channel for Right Track Admissions about living your story, the concept of to live your story. Because if you are applying for a job, say, or you're applying for an academic for college admissions, and you are, let's say, a rising sophomore or even a rising junior, right? If you don't have the volunteer experiences, the experience that showcase your compassion, the experience that showcase your leadership, your ability to work well with others, the ability to be vulnerable, the ability to take on challenges, if you don't have these experiences, okay, when it gets time to writing your story or applying to that job, and if you don't have those stories, how are you going to be able to work through an interview where those questions will come up and you'll have no answer? Where those questions and applications will come up and you'll have no answer. It is imperative that you start building out your life, living it today for tomorrow, living your story, right? That seems like a convoluted, almost like Twilight Zone-ish concept. Like, I'm going to be writing about what's going to happen to me today. So if tomorrow there's a car accident in front of me, that will impact and imprint something in my mind that will impact something else in my mind. And I want to be cognizant of that because that may become the story that I will write about later on. That will probably impact who I am. So to do that, to think about these things, to establish the story, to live your story, you need to be proactive first and foremost. And by being proactive, I mean, don't just passively sit back and wait for life to happen to you. Go out there and seize it. That is critical. That is important, okay? In thinking about being proactive, taking on those challenges, making life experiences, you also want to embrace those challenges, take on those risks. If there's something that's been in front of you, let's use, being Muslim in America, for, since the most recent administration, and even before, Muslims have had a very difficult time here, difficult time internationally, right? So they faced all kinds of trials and tribulations. Those in and of themselves, you either stood up to those challenges in a way that made sense, that wasn't, let's say, illegal, but you stood up to those challenges and that made you who you are. You want to think about that. That informs your story and that informs what you're going to actually do and answer when it comes to your applications. Again, so you want to embrace those challenges. You want to be proactive. You want to take those risks. If you don't take calculated risks, you're never going to learn, right? Even small risks, even small things, as long as they're calculated, they're not going to impact you in the long run in terms of hurt you or anything like that. I talked about networking and building your community. Again, socializing with others is mission critical, whether it's your friends, family, classmates, employers, coaches. Socializing, learning from other people, helping other people in the process is also extremely, extremely important. Okay? And then another aspect of it, like there's two aspects. The other aspect I want to kind of really hone on is set yourself goals. I constantly have a reminder in my calendar that pops up that says, doing a weekly outlook, kind of looking and assessing what have I accomplished this week, taking stock of those, taking stock of where I didn't accomplish, and then basically almost either writing out or even just thinking about it theoretically, what am I going to be doing for the next week? So that the following week I've really gained from the week that I've just had. So set goals for yourself, small or high, start small, and then start building them up. Because I think that's a very, very important way of kind of building yourself and being goal-oriented and thinking forward. I always say this is something that I lack, and I hope you do not, is being creative. I think is so important, and really honing on those hobbies. I constantly gave myself certain things I wanted to learn, like playing a guitar or even salsa dancing or something like that. I think it's super important to think in a different way that you normally wouldn't. I take painting classes. I've done that during the COVID crisis since, we're all cooped up at home. So I've been trying to do more things that are creative in nature so that I can develop another part of my own brain and my own talents and my own story, right? Take leadership experiences. When I was at UCLA as an undergraduate, I became president of the United Arab Society right after September 11th. That literally set the motion for me to take leadership activities in every university that I went to subsequently, whether it was at Berkeley leading that journal, whether it was at Harvard becoming the president of the Harvard Arab Student Association and being on the alumni board, whether it was at Cambridge leading student treks, whatever it was, I was constantly, because I put myself in that position, it was a difficult position to be in, I was able to achieve it because I pushed myself hard and learned from my own abilities and mistakes and so forth to learn about my own story and to learn about what really can test me, what things I'm good at, what things I'm not that I can improve on. And then seek mentorship if you can, right? If you have the ability to find a mentor. Till today, I don't have a mentor or mentors per se. I have colleagues that I constantly talk to, but I do regret not having a mentor. And I think if you have the ability to find a mentor that can help you with career decisions, life decisions, it will be imperative for your own development and being able to kind of flesh out your own story. Okay? Now, a couple of things just to kind of keep in mind. We talked about the activities, and some people may be confused. Well, what kind of activities are you talking about? How involved should I be in those activities, right? Well, first thing is the pro tip. I always want you to think about creating a Google document, right? And in that Google document, I want you to start writing out all the major things that you've kind of gone through, experiences, challenges, risks. Think about that. Flesh it out. Flesh it out. Put it down on paper. Because eventually you'll be using that document to inform the stories you need to tell, whether it's in interviews, in scholarship applications, in college applications, graduate applications, what have you. Okay? So it's important to kind of put that down on paper. And in doing so, one of the ways that we talked about is the activities that you take on. And so when thinking about activities and which ones to actually choose, you want to be thinking about those things that you're passionate about. Are you passionate about helping children, elderly folks? Are you passionate about sports, immigration? Are you passionate about travel? What is it you're passionate about? Start building those activities around that passion, because that passion is what's going to give you the long game and the staying power to maximize it, to also give you the motivation to take on a leadership position, right? And you want to start thinking about those things, if you can, about unique activities, not the ones that everybody does. Now, look, for example, I'll give you a small example. I've had quite a few clients that come to us and say, well, I'm an Eagle Scout. I was in the Boy Scout. I get it. It's awesome. Good for you, right? I think that's going to help you tremendously. But if there's another thing that you've done that is a little bit more unique, like some skill you have that you can complement with your Boy Scout kind of stuff, I think that could be even more impactful and even more memorable, right? Always think about the activities you take has some kind of compassion, community-oriented approach. At least some of the activities, at least one of the activities you do should be around that, because that all speaks to who you are as a person, your sense of compassion, your sense of wanting to give back, right? And that's what schools want to see above all. Not selfish students that are going to sit and study the whole time, but people that are part of a bigger community, because we are not operating in silos, right? We cannot. That's not the way human nature is, unless we're hermits in the jungle. You've got to be thinking about how you interact with other people. So why don't you incubate that concept when you're in school, so that thereafter you build those skills that help you in your professional and your personal life as you go through life. And then again, it's always important to kind of think about those activities that are not just like one and done. You do them in 1 month or 2 months and you leave. Go through the activity. Maybe start as a member, then become a vice president, then become a president of the organization. That's what happened when I was part of the Arab Society at UCLA. I started off as just a member, and then when the going got tough, they needed somebody to step up to the challenge. I stepped up to it right after September 11th. And you can imagine the fallout of being Muslim and Arab at UCLA at that time, right after September 11th. But that helped because I kind of did it for 2 years. And then when the call came, I was ready to kind of step into it. So don't take on 50 activities. Take on a select few, as they say. Try to go a mile deep and an inch wide rather than a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of substance. And then in terms of how to apply your brand into those activities that we've just discussed, here are some examples. So this is just, I'll just quickly kind of say it is, think about in terms of activities, in terms of like, oh, I love advocacy. Well, think about student government. Think about, creating an organization, an anti-bullying campaign, right? When you're thinking about volunteer activities, think about the passion that you have in certain areas. Well, I love music. Well, then teach music to kids. I love medicine because I want to become a doctor. Then go help, in an elderly community, right? Or I love animals. I'm compassionate to animals. Think about looking at a shelter, right? So think about those kind of things. The same with the interests in terms of part-time and internships that you have. Think about how you can be involved in things that really kind of showcase those passions and those things, that all comes back to the brand that you have and what you live for, right? Academics, those are other activities that you can be thinking about. And then the life experiences. We've spoken about this quite a few times in terms of if you faced challenges in your life, likely many of us have, some of us have buried it, but those activities make you who you are, right? You have to go through hell to get to heaven. And so in that capacity, if you have those difficulties and experiences, you want to be thinking about how you handle those experiences in terms of the values you have and the brand you have in dealing with those life experiences. I've listed some things there because that's going to help you a lot in terms of when you write essays about diversity, or if you go to an employer and you say, well, how would you help in our diversity inclusion campaign? You have the information to kind of really go in there. And it's not enough, to be honest, just to say I'm Muslim and I practice the religion. It has to be about more than that. Truly, we do not live in a Muslim world. That's a fact, and that's a good thing. In my opinion, that's a great thing because it's all about diversity. It's better to learn from every other culture, not just living in a bubble of just people that are like-minded only. It's imperative to kind of think out of that because you grow through those challenges, those differences, right? That's what they say, you celebrate those differences. So if you're ever writing about that in your stories, in the diversity statement or the job, you want to harp more, not just on, I'm Muslim, this is my community, but as a Muslim in my community, I've learned certain mechanisms of tolerance, which have allowed me to reach out to different communities, which have allowed me to build bridges between communities, which allows me to transfer that sense of compassion to other issues and other factors out there that really can help society. Not just because I'm Muslim and only Muslim, but Islam has taught me certain core values that have allowed me to be a tolerant, open-minded person that can reach across different religions and cultures. Something I put in there as well, which is the summer activities, which I think is also important, especially if you are if you're in high school or even in college, make sure to take advantage of those summer activities in terms of the activities you take, because your competition is. Obviously now we're in a little bit of a tougher situation with COVID, but you can do things from behind, closed doors. For example, I'm working with an organization here in Los Angeles that's helping elderly community get connected to local volunteers that can help get their groceries and get their medications, right? And I'm a volunteer coordinator contacting the elderly folk and also connecting them to volunteers that can help them out. And I'm doing that all behind the comforts of my computer. So there's all kinds of ways to do work that is beneficial to the community and so forth in terms of your activities that you take normally or even you do during the summer. Last but not least, I think it's important to kind of just put this point, which is kind of like a hack that I've thought about, and I think it's been very, very useful for those that have worked with us, which is if you're building your brand and building your story, forget the brand, but building your story, right? And you'd say you're 16 applying when you're 18. You're going to say, well, what should I be thinking about? What should I be doing? What activities? Do yourself a favor. Go to your top 3-4 universities, right? And take a look at the essays they've asked in that previous year. Take a look at them right there. Tell us about a topic that changed your mind. Tell us about a problem you want to solve. Tell us about a class you want to teach, right? If you're like, man, I have no idea how to answer that, start thinking about that now and reverse engineer it. Start thinking about those experiences that can really play a role in being able to resolve those issues, to be able to answer those questions, right? And that's not just for undergraduates, but that's also for graduate students as well in almost every field. Look at the questions they're asking. Get a sense of what kind of student they want for that school. And start building your extracurricular activities and so forth around those core essays and qualities that they're looking for amongst their population. And as you can see, it's about beliefs, passion, action, and so forth, and goals. Those are really the key elements that these schools are looking for. Anyway, that's pretty much it. There's a ton more you can talk about. The topic is very esoteric in ways. It's a very big topic, but it's one that I've found constantly, as I've been doing this for 12 years, helping students, that there constantly comes back to what is the story. And I notice immediately that when a student doesn't have a strong core values, doesn't have a strong brand, doesn't have a strong narrative from the beginning, it's almost impossible to put together an effective story that will convince anybody to take that student on. And that's something you need to be building over time. So I hope that's helpful to you, and I hope that you can see the benefits of such an approach as it pertains not just for the academics, but for the professional realm, when you're writing cover letters, when you're hitting up people on LinkedIn, when you're putting things on your resume, and when you're going through the job interview process, and even in your personal life, whether talking to a spouse, a significant other, your friend, convincing them of an idea and so forth, it comes down to your certain core values, the brand that you have, that you identify with, and how you're able to articulate that effectively to win them over. So I hope that's been helpful from that perspective. I've got up there on the screen different sources that we have, and I'm sure Imran and the team can share with you guys. If you're applying to schools, we've got sample essays there for you, blog articles. We're putting out a lot of video content now, talking about a lot of these really critical topics, especially during COVID. We have a whole Quora channel with about 100 answers relating to all kinds of issues and topics, whether it's in graduate school or college. We have checklists that are available on our computer, on our site and so forth under our resources. And of course, you can hit us up on our social media handles, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't think we're going to, and LinkedIn. That's pretty much it from our social media handles. So I hope you found this helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Hamada, thank you a lot, man. That was very beneficial, very detailed, even though it was quick, but we got a lot of gems in that presentation. So we're going to open up the time now for questions. Please feel free to ask questions that are pertinent to the presentation in the comment section. And just to kind of get us started while we're waiting for those questions, Hamada. So from a metaphysical perspective, we're taught sometimes as believers to kind of check our egos at the door and maybe not talk about ourselves very much. So how do we reconcile some of this programming where we're not very inclined towards talking about ourselves and wanting to talk about the things that we've accomplished, and now having to brand ourselves when we apply to college?
Well, let's distinguish, I think, talking about yourself in a way that is ingratiating and self-aggrandizement versus talking about yourself in a mechanism that is vulnerable, that makes you dig deep about who you are. Whether that vulnerability reveals that you have certain issues, character flaws, and so forth, or reveals that you have some great qualities that you want to surface. But that sense of vulnerability is mission critical, and that's what I mean by trying to talk more about yourself. But again, it's not I. It's really I in the context of X or Y and what this has done for me and how this has impacted me. It's I in the context of others, right? And that's when you start talking about yourself. Look, we live in America, and America loves these kind of stories. You told me, we were in England. I can tell you right now, those guys, it's not mission critical to be so personal. It's not as mission critical to be all about I. It's a lot there. It's all about the humility of just focusing on what they're asking for and really not talking about the things that really may push us in certain ways to become a little bit more emotional and vulnerable. I noticed that when I applied to universities in England and have helped other students with applications to those schools. It's just not the same way. It's actually been reflective in terms of the letters of recommendation they get. The letters of recommendation that they can get, the guy could be an outstanding student, or she could be a phenomenal professional. And the letters of recommendation are very, very mediocre and bland. It's like, yeah, they were good. Good? Are you kidding me? In America, that person would be astronomical, phenomenal. But they don't use words like that. So, in America, they do like that. It's a lot about kind of talking about yourself and being willing to do that.
So it's, a mix of your intentions if you are trying to, show off in a sense, and also culture, understanding the dynamics of the culture you're operating within.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to being authentic, right? And that comes down to your personal brand. And that comes down to who you are and the narrative that you're telling other people. That's where, if you're authentic in what you're saying, even if it sounds like, or it may come off, or it may seem like, I guess, self-aggrandizement, it's not, because it's authentic. It's authentic to who you are. You may be proud of the fact. I'm super proud of the fact that I've been to more countries than most people. I also understand that that's a position of privilege, but I also understand that it's a position of putting myself out there, sacrificing certain things to go to very far distant countries because I want to see them versus like going to the same places everybody else goes, right? I'm proud of that fact, and I will talk about it in my narrative, in my little spiel about myself and who I am.
What's interesting is you brought up being vulnerable, and even in like leadership training and talking about effective leadership, they talk about becoming vulnerable, fostering this trust with your team. So what would you say to this? I've heard this advice before in terms of I remember I talked to a college counselor, guidance counselor, what have you, and he was talking about people who talk about ailments and illnesses that they have gotten over. And he said that he didn't advise people use such stories in their applications because it could be looked upon as, wait, is this person going to get sick again? Is this person going to relapse? Is this going to cost the university some money? So how would you respond to that?
It's a tough question because I've had people that say, well, I have certain mental conditions, schizophrenia, bipolar, anger issues, PTSD, what have you. And I'm not going to lie. I think part of me, I think just my own ingrained thinking is you want to tread lightly because you never know when that could come back against you, and you can never find out if you were dinged from a school or from a job because you were upfront honest about a certain mental condition that you have. But if you have certain illnesses and so forth, and you don't have to talk about like, I am in the situation, I don't know if I'm going to live or die. But you talk about like, this is how I've come through this very difficult time, and I could have either gone one way or the other, but my mental strength really pushed me in one way to persevere. And I found other people who are in the same situation as me, and we built a community, and through that we built a sense of resilience. And through that is something I want to share. I want to take life by the horns, and I want to do everything I can to maximize what I have, with the time that I'm given. Right? That is a huge difference between a story about, hey, woe is me, this is what I'm going through, I don't know how long I'm going to live, and I really hope I can maximize this program. There's a huge difference, right?
Right. So you had a very interesting slide up at one point talking about that there's so many people who are getting very good grades and they rank at the top of their classes. So that's not good enough now when you apply to college. And that personal brand, that personal story is important. But given the fact that we live in the age of social media and everybody and their mothers has a story or a brand or a podcast, have you found that college students today have even more of a difficult time getting admissions than, say, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago?
Well, I think it was a different time back then. We were assessed on different values and different things, different challenges back then, right? But right now, you're right. I mean, it's hard there's so much social space. I mean, even look at the stuff we're doing. We've been trying Right Track to kind of get more content out there that really helps people, and it's hard. There's a lot of people who are far better at becoming influencers, right? It's almost an art to do that. So if you come out of genuine and you don't know how to actually operate it, it can be very difficult. So there's a lot of space that's being claimed out there. What makes you different is really, I think, that sense of vulnerability, digging really deep about who you are, because each one of us can be impacted in different ways, whether it's from the COVID crisis or our own religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs or our family's influence or cultural influence or what have you. So everybody has their own way of dealing with it. And that's really where you can kind of surface your stories, that inner vulnerability, kind of find out who you are. Versus we all like soccer or we all like, hip hop or whatever it is, so that all our identities become very similar. The way we distinguish our identities through the vulnerability, the challenges, the risks that we take, and the challenges that we face. And that's really what distinguishes you from the next person. Not just doing, jumping on the same bandwagon, because then it becomes like a copy paste, right? You're like, oh yeah, there we go again. Another student who loves hip hop, another student who loves American football, another student that wants to be a YouTube superstar, talking about food or talking about whatever it is, right? It's really about those vulnerabilities that make you kind of craft you. I mean, I'm hoping even through this, what I'm talking to you now, all of this is not something I learned out of a book. It's experience I've had through my life, right? All the years that I've had, everything's kind of been thrown around. There is no rhyme or reason sometimes. It's through those difficulties and things that I've faced that I'm able to kind of churn out life lessons that I can then talk to other people about, making it even more authentic.
Just a personal question, based on the fact that you've traveled to over 130 countries, just give us a quick rundown, man, of some benefits of traveling, meeting people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and even I could see that being such a benefit in your current role, where you're having to help people craft their narratives. So just some benefits for traveling.
Sure. It's a great question. Again, one I'm very proud of. My goal was to hit 150 countries this year. That definitely did not happen. I'm at 141 now, and it's something that's taken a long time to establish and achieve. But through that process, what keeps motivating me to go to very distant places and so forth is that one is the constant for me testing myself. I put myself in very odd situations, which you're going to naturally have when you're going to very different countries with different cultures, different histories. So one is the opportunity to see how do I act in a completely different environment. Number two is there was a great commercial on Turkish Airlines about this, about travel and the fact that it's one of those rare things that you can do, which can really hone all your senses. You smell something. I don't know about you, but if you go to a different country, there's a certain smell when you just get off the plane. And it's the smell. It's what you see. It's what you hear. It's what you touch. It's what you taste. And it's very rare in life that we can take all five and heighten those senses to create almost a super sixth sense. And that's not just intuition, but that's a sixth sense of feeling really alive. And that comes from travel for me. That's what it brings it all. That's when I'm in my flow state, so to speak. Another factor for me is almost anybody I meet, I can always say, oh, what's your background? And they could say anywhere from Nigerian to from Vanuatu to Cote d'Ivoire, all the way down to Colombia. And I've been there. I have a story to say. I can relate to them. And this also helps me when I'm drafting and thinking about narratives for people and coming up with their narratives, because I've been to the country, so I have those touch points. So it allows me to be more relatable and understand people far better than others. I think those are some of the key things that have helped me through my traveling and constantly motivate me to do it.
Ahmad, I want to thank you for your time, brother. This was a very beneficial interview and presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the website is righttrackadmissions.com. And if you need help in crafting your personal story, your personal narrative, your brand while you're applying for college, I highly recommend and suggest that you visit righttrackadmissions.com. This is Ahmad, the CEO and founder of that organization. Thank you one more time.
Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate it. I think you guys are doing some phenomenal work, and I really hope your students find this useful, helpful, and they're able to succeed in their lives through the story they tell.
Thank you so much, brother, and we look forward to having you back on sometime in the future, and best of luck to you and your team.
Thank you, inshallah. Bye-bye.